the prior owner, and had held it for probably 6 or 7 years. And they actually also owned, and because they had foreclosed on the owner for what is to our rear as well. So I think altogether, this particular parcel that they took over was about 78 acres. And they ended up deciding that, the front would be great for retail. So they put a Scala Parkway in order to differentiate, the retail component from the rear. And now the rear, where it says phase one, is actually a new multifamily development. And where it says phase two, there's two more multifamily developments going there. One has started, one has not. And then if you see in between phase one and phase two, there's sort of an open area, and that is because of drainage. And so that all of that area has to be kept for stormwater runoff. Um, and it's not nearly as pretty as it looks, to be honest with you. It's a concrete culvert right now. So what we're showing is, the way it will be once everything is developed out. Um, we we've probably held this land for 2 years. Um, like I said, when you're doing speculative development, it's very important to get a price which you can, you know, afford to hold the land for several years until it matures enough for you to lease it or sell the parcels and afford to do the development. And so, a lot of the land for sale right now, everybody wants top dollar, but that would not allow someone to, hold it, pay property taxes, interest if you have a loan, do all the design, and all of that. So that's one of the things we felt like was a win-win on this one. We love the site, but we also got it at a price which allowed us to develop into it. Even if we, I mean, I could take the next 10, 15 years if I wanted to at this price. But our goal, would be to get out of it in the next couple of years. And so one of the things I'll just talk about, I've got about 7 minutes left, so I want to hit a few different things. One is topography. This site falls from Military Parkway over to the Evo side. There is an 80-foot drop. And then obviously you can see in the middle, you've got this huge stormwater, area that has to be reserved. And so it sort of divides it between, phase one and phase two. So that's one thing. And that's why if you notice on the video, the phase one side is really ugly. It is all, it's been scraped of trees, it's been mass graded, and all it is just basically, rock. That's the other thing in this area. You have what you call rippable limestone in all across the area, and so you have to plan, that you're going to be removing that rock, and you have to make sure your budget can fit that in there. The phase two side, we left treed. And part of it's just because, we don't believe in taking trees down just to take them down. We felt like phase two being the deeper side, if you'll see, that compared to most of the pads on phase one, the phase two side is really the only area that has enough depth to accommodate a large footprint user like a theater. And we really wanted an entertainment anchor here. We did not see this, just based on the demographics and the competition in the area and, everything else that was going on around it. We did not see this as a high potential for just doing your normal QSR, quick service restaurant pads, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Chick-fil-A, Mattress Firm, banks, that type of thing. We will probably do some of that on phase one, but frankly, in the area, it's oversaturated with that type of user. What this area really needs is some higher end dining, higher end strip, and an entertainment user. This site, one of the reasons we love it, it has all three components. It has tourists. It sits right in front of SeaWorld. It has businesses. There are 100,000 white collar workers within 3 miles. And then it has a great resident population. And, like I said, the area is sort of over retailed, but what's really missing is your higher end fast casuals. There's nowhere for these corporations to take people, to a steakhouse or, like I said, see a movie or something like that. So we knew we wanted to save phase two with the depth for an anchor. And so we were lucky enough to get Evo. Now with COVID, Evo has, delayed their opening, but they originally announced that they were going to be open by March of 2021, and I think now, if they get open by the end of 21 or by movie season being right around the holidays, that would be great. Which leaves phase one, and back to our decision to go ahead and take down the trees and mass grade it. We needed people to be able to see each pad, because the trees and they're not really the greatest of trees. There are a lot of shrubs and small trees, and so you really couldn't see the pads. So now that you can see the pads, we've generated a lot more interest in it. We are talking with Chick-fil-A about the corner. They have not committed yet, but they like it. That's probably the only QSR we would consider there is a Chick-fil-A. The rest we would want higher end. And then you see the two kind of orangish reddish buildings. Those are going to be strips with some higher end fast casuals on the end, and then some inline users. The only drive-through areas we could do are just to the right of those orange. If you see that yellow, that small yellow, I can't zoom in here, but that could be a drive-through, and then the corner could be a drive-through. But due to the topography, there's no way we could do drive-through on either of the strip buildings. So that's kind of where we're at. I mean, we've announced Evo. Obviously, because of COVID, they pushed. Once we get a new date from them, then we will go back, and we've been sort of reserving the leasing on phase one. Because, and once first of all, when we were able to announce Evo, it really changed things. But secondly, when we be able to actually announce an actual opening date, we'll generate a lot higher market rents on phase one. So that is the plan. What else can I tell you? Some of these pads, we're not planning on selling off any of these pads. The best return to us will be on a lease basis or ground leasing, maybe a pad to somebody. But if we just sell the pads versus lease them, you don't, generate enough profit. So it's better to hold out for the leasing, although a lot of users want to purchase. Goodness, I think that's about it. Maybe I'll stop there and just see if anybody has any questions, or if we want to go on and let Amber talk about, the lending side.
Yeah, I have a quick question. What is can you explain what a ground lease is, really quick?
Sure. That's a good question. So a ground lease would be if I took one of these pads and leased the land only to the user. Let's call it Chick-fil-A, just 'cause Chick-fil-A does some ground leases. So let's just take this hard corner over here at Military and 151. A Chick-fil-A type of user, they're going to want to come in and say, well, I'll buy it from you. I'll buy the land and I'll build my own building on it. But like I said, that doesn't generate, a lot of profit, because you're one and done. Your sale transaction is all you get, and the profit off of that sale is it. So instead, what I would say is, well, I'm not going to sell it to you, but I will ground lease it to you. So I would lease them the land, and they would, sign a long-term lease on that land, probably for 20 years initially. And then they would probably want 60 or 70 years of options on it. And so for that entire period, they're going to pay me, let's call it 90 grand a year to start with, and then it'll escalate every year. Once they lease it from me, the land only, then they come and they build their building on it at their cost. And when they leave, I get the building. So the reason it's better than me just selling it to them is I get that cash flow every year of the land lease payment or the ground lease payment. And then if they do leave, no problem, I get their building and I didn't pay for it. So that's what a ground lease is. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
What would the benefit be for Chick-fil-A in this example to do a ground lease versus purchasing the land from you?
Yeah, it's not to their benefit. The reason they would do it, if they wanted, if they felt strongly enough about the site that they needed to be here, then they would ground lease it from us. And so, and other users are like that as well. But I mean, the only reason they would do it is to get somewhere that otherwise they're not going to get because nobody's going to sell it to them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a quick question too. How did y'all go about finding such a large anchor like Evo?
It's a good question. Well, first of all, it was 2 years of work. We probably talked to 50 people. So we knew that in chasing an entertainment category, you can kind of tell the players, like, first of all, there's, not every theater is growing even before COVID. So, I mean, we isolated just among our own team, and we have great brokers down here with us. So they helped us isolate, okay, who would be the likely folks. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is just to the north and there's several of them throughout San Antonio and the Hill Country, is a chain called Santikos. They have really great brand recognition and market share in San Antonio. So we knew we needed to find someone who was not afraid to compete with Santikos. And then there were other folks that had committed elsewhere in the market, which sort of counted them out. There's a rule that used to be official, now is, I'm told, unofficial, and people are waiving, is that the movie studios will not release films to movie theaters within 3 miles of each other. Now, like I said, that has relaxed a lot over the last 3-4 years. But that used to mean there would never be theaters within 3 miles of each other. And now we're seeing that rule broken. But anyway, once we kind of narrowed it down, there is a very specialized package that has to be prepared for any of these theaters to look at your site. And you've got to gather certain demographics, certain information about the competitors before they'll even take a look at it.
Wow, thank you.
All right. Do we want to discuss the lending aspect?
Yeah, so if no one has any other questions, Amber, definitely go ahead.
Okay. Well, first off, I wanted to ask Brenna if she could share with us how she financed the project before I could dive in.
Sure. We bought phase 1 just cash. Generally, I don't believe in land loans. I think it's too hard to bet on, how fast you're going to lease something. Yep. And then you start making decisions, more about your trying to beat the loan maturity date than what's right for the land.
Sure.
So we bought phase 1 cash. That said, when phase 2 came up, we decided to go ahead and at that point we knew we probably had Evo, so we decided to do a land loan on it. So right now we do have a loan across the whole thing, and it's due in about a year. That's how we financed it. And if we end up building anything, what we would do is we've got an agreed upon release price with the lender to take that particular parcel out And if we, needed to go get a construction loan, we would give the current lender the first chance. But if they didn't want to do it, then we'd just go do a separate construction loan for that building.
Yep. Well, what I would say, thanks, Brenna, for giving us that insight. Nothing beats what the developer actually did as far as testimony for finance. But what I'll tell you guys is retail has really gotten sort of a bad rap lately in recent years. It was not like that when I first started. It was part of the main food groups of real estate. But when you see how Amazon has transformed retail, and when you hear about retailers like Victoria's Secret that are shutting doors and things like that, or other retail establishments that are closing, I'm drawing a blank on some of the others, but there's been several throughout the news. It causes banks to be a little more conservative with retail in terms of the LTV that they'll grant. Or especially for construction, any sort of construction that someone would do is probably going to have, lenders differ. So you'll always find a lender who may be willing to do something a little different. But for the most part, they're going to have completion guarantees and some form of repayment guarantee. It's very difficult to find non-recourse construction loans for retail in today's environment. Although you may be able to find someone who will do it, but they'll offset that with a much higher rate. Some of the things that we would look at is the lease staggering and rollover. So we would look at, of the various tenants that Brenna has in this development, we wouldn't want all of the leases to expire at the same time or to be near the maturity of the loan. You would want some staggering so that they're not all rolling at the same time. We would also look at, if for new development like this, we would want to understand Brenna's expertise with, and she already alluded to it earlier, but her relationships with brokers like Janice and Najdi, who can help fill this thing up with other tenants. So that's very important. That's vital for a retail developer. We would also look at the net worth and liquidity of Brenna's team and whoever's signing on the non-recourse carve-outs or the recourse carve-outs, depending upon whether it's recourse or not. And the traffic counts are something that we would look at when you guys take the real estate course on market studies. And it mirrors the CCIM market study course. I think they actually use the same manual. A lot of those same factors that are discussed in that course are the sort of things that lenders are going to look at because we have to prepare a credit package to our credit officer or whoever's approving the loan that shows that we've checked all these boxes. And for a large part, we'll rely on Brenna and a lot of her expertise and the research she's already done, because I sometimes think that if you're working with a developer that's very experienced, they can be your greatest resource with writing up some of those things that are required, because they've already done that. They've already checked all those boxes. And then the other thing I was going to add that's non-related to retail, but in terms of the ground lease, you see that in a lot of forms of real estate, not just retail. You may see it oftentimes in student housing. It can be prevalent when the campus doesn't want to let go of land. They may do a ground lease for student housing. You might see it for affordable housing. You might see it for multifamily, especially for parking garages. So that's a concept that is very prevalent in real estate that you'll see in a lot of different examples. But that's all I have to really mention on the retail lending. If anybody has any questions, I can take them now.
I think I'll go first. You mentioned non-recourse and recourse loans. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. So recourse is when it doesn't necessarily have to be Brenna, but it could be someone at Brenna's company or whoever is in the organizational structure who has an interest in the property and they are signing recourse. So they're saying, if this loan goes bad, you can come after me for a portion or up to possibly the entire amount of the loan balance, depending upon what the loan documents say. Sometimes it may only be 25% recourse. Sometimes it's only 50% recourse. It may be 100% recourse. Just depends upon what's negotiated and what the bank agrees to. But if you're signing recourse, they can come after your personal assets to make whole that loan payment. If it's non-recourse, they can only, there's carve outs for bad boy acts. Like if you were committing fraud or something you shouldn't be doing. But generally speaking, if it's non-recourse, they cannot come after you for the loan balance. If you could still go into bankruptcy, which is not a good thing, and lenders are going to want, that's one thing we'd want to look at is, has this sponsor ever filed for bankruptcy? It may not be personal bankruptcy, but it could be bankruptcy of an entity that they controlled, and that would still need to be disclosed. And people can do that on non-recourse loans, but the borrowing entity will have to pay taxes on the foreclosed amount if it ends up getting foreclosed upon. So that's the difference between recourse and non-recourse.
Okay, that makes sense. And for like these like retail spaces and the restaurant spaces, do they usually do non-recourse or recourse?
Well, I think it depends upon, Brenna can opine on it as well, but in today's environment, I think more lenders are going to want some level of recourse. But Brenna, maybe you can elaborate the loan that you guys got, whether it had some recourse on it or not.
Sure. This loan in particular is non-recourse. The N3, the ownership of it it's under a trust. And so I typically, since it's not my trust and I'm not the beneficiary of the trust, I typically don't guarantee construction loans or any kind of loans. But that said, I'm not sure we would get that today. It is very difficult to get non-recourse retail loans right now.
Yeah.
And, I think that if you have a company structure that owns other assets like we do, because remember, we have 65 other assets that are cash flowing. And so in that case, the lender is pretty comfortable that if we can't execute on this particular project, we'll have the money to pay their loan off no matter what. But we are a little bit different. We're more of a corporate type of real estate company. A lot of developers, frankly, are one-off, guys or gals, and they develop, they build, and they sell. And that's great. I mean, that's more of the traditional developer, but because of that, they don't own a lot of assets, and so they will be required to personally guarantee it, like Amber said.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I think we should distinguish is there are different players for the different types of loans you can get. There are banks, there are debt funds, there are life companies that will play more in the development space that Brenna's case study is in. And then once it is built, occupied, and stabilized, you can still have some banks in that space, but CMBS is also a major source of non-recourse lending for stabilized retail. And that market has had a lot of whirlwinds go on with COVID and everything going on. I know we had a period of time where our CMBS shop was not aggregating new business because they really wanted to see what was going on in the market. So there's definitely been some volatility there. But I would say, for sure, one of the things that Brenna's development has that is excellent, that a lot of lenders look for, is that entertainment factor, the EVO, or the experience, because I feel like the stores are falling out of favor with lenders these days. I think there's been way too much problems with store closures and just with online shopping. So I think, you know, Chick-fil-A is always a home run. Who doesn't love Chick-fil-A, right? And the Evo Entertainment, there's always nail salons, always knock it out of the park. We had to build a project that the whole thing was in shambles, but the nail salon was just on fire. But so it's all about the experience in retail nowadays. And I think the more tenants you like Brenna said, the high-end steak restaurant, give someone an experience. And I think that's the type of tenant that lenders are looking for retail right now.
Yep.
Hey, Amber, it's Dr. Guttery. I'm going to jump in for just a second.
Sure.
If I can ask all of our panelists a favor, LTV, CMBS, would y'all try to avoid the acronyms, or if you do, tell them that's loan to value
Sure,
or
I'm
commercial
sorry.
mortgage-backed securities?
Yes, I was talking about commercial mortgage-backed securities.
Yeah, so if you use, in fact, I would like if you use the acronyms that industry uses, but if you'll tell the students what they mean, because I have a feeling they didn't know what CMBS was.
Yes, those are loans that are originated by different originators, and then they're aggregated, and then they're securitized into pools. And for example, we may go to market with like $500 million of a pool, and we'll go with someone else, and then they'll have 500 million, $500 million, right? And then we'll securitize it together. And there's investors that will buy pieces of those loans. And that is commercial mortgage-backed securities.
That's excellent. I am going to thank everybody for joining tonight. I know y'all are going to continue, but I have an MBA class I have to teach in 15 minutes. And I look forward very much tomorrow to check in with Arden and Gabby and find out how this goes, which I know how it's going to go, but I'm just still excited to hear about it.
Sounds
So
good.
Good to
thank
see
you
you
all
again.
for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Does anyone have any other questions for Amber?
Amber, you kind of touched upon, what are the things that you would like about this particular property, like the high-end steak restaurant or experiential entertainment with Evo. But like in a more general scenario, what is the kind of mix that you're mostly looking at when it comes to retail properties, given the kind of uncertainty we have in the market right now?
Well, I think big box retail is really tough to finance right now. Like the big TJ Maxx, the Sports Authority, things like that. But every deal differs, and I'll tell you, you may have they may have gotten the land for a dirt cheap price, just like Brenna's situation, and that may compensate for something else that maybe isn't as strong. So I think you have to look at every deal individually. And it also varies the sponsorship. If you have a really strong sponsor and this is just what they do and big box retail is their thing and they've done it and they knock it out of the park every time, then maybe it's worth financing. So I think you really have to look at the whole project, the sponsor, the retail, the tenants, everything.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? And y'all, we're actually doing really great on time. So we can continue with Christine. And then after Christine, we can go to break. So Christine, if you want to start.
Sure. Well, there's a few different ways on the construction side that you can look at this project. I'm going to approach it from the construction management side because there are several different types of properties within the main property. And there's, as Brenna said, different topography that you have to deal with. a lot of issues. So ideally, I would say you'd want a firm that's going to take the whole project, manage it as a whole, and then individually you would contract out for each space. Like Brenda's saying, they lease to Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A then is going to build out the space. So you would have a middleman, being the construction management firm, that would monitor and ensure that that construction is up to code, taking into account all of the drainage requirements. Because you have this drainage area in the middle of the space, it's going to impact both phases. So you need to know things like that. There's a lot of pre-building work that has to happen as the construction manager or management firm. I won't get into all the specifics on that right now, but I would say that's the best way to go in a case like this. Have a firm that's going to manage all of the construction for you. That way it's fairly seamless in terms of the interaction with each individual entity that's leasing the space from Brenna's company. The medical space is interesting to me in a construction perspective. I don't know exactly if that's going to be a medical office building, a street side ER type of facility, what the thinking is. So that I would have a lot of other questions about. But the straight up retail spaces, whether it's restaurant or dry goods, obviously they're two different animals, but you can approach them fairly similarly in terms of interacting with the individual client. If you have someone like Brenda's saying Chick-fil-A, for example. So when we're looking at how to build out this project, Brenda has it in 2 phases. You're going to probably subdivide phase 1 probably into another 4 phases. It really has to have a lot of background work with Brenda's company on who's coming in first, who do they have lined up, how are they building out the different buildings, because it's as if you have a puzzle and you're trying to make all these pieces connect, being built out at different times. So, and you're trying to do that in a way that, one, allows traffic to the space that's being built first. For example, if it was that bottom left corner of phase 1 for Chick-fil-A, they obviously have street access on Military Drive, but you're going to want to ensure that that access is clear because you have a second space right when you turn into that entrance there. So they'd have to make a sharp right and go down to Chick-fil-A. Well, you need to make sure if there's construction happening with the other space that's literally right at that entrance, that it's not disrupting anything, because Chick-fil-A is not going to be happy then because they can't get their traffic in there. And everybody's seen Chick-fil-A at lunchtime, so it's a madhouse. So there's a lot of groundwork that has to happen prior to actually the construction. But I think approaching it from that way and then utilizing local general contractors is a great way to go about a development like this, because you want community buy-in. You need the community to want this development there. There's always going to be people who don't. You may have to do outreach events and things like that, depending on what this was before, how receptive people are to having this large land mass now filled with things that are going to increase traffic flow. Do they want the traffic? The other things that are on those roadways, how is it impacting them? So there's a lot of other work that has to be done prior to the actual build out. But again, having a construction management firm to do that for you and help you and work in tandem with Brenna and each individual tenant will allow you then use local contractors. You have the community buy-in, you're providing jobs to the local community, not just when things are done, but all along the way. So that's great. The other ancillary things that I would want to know are, you do have an airport that's really not that far away. Where does this fall in air traffic? If it's in the air traffic pattern of the airport, even if it's a reroute pattern, your roofs of your buildings may have to be a certain material to allow for fuel dumps, things that normal people, we wouldn't necessarily think of when we see a plane flying over a neighborhood, but when you're building a commercial building, you have to take those things into account. Assuming they're all going to be white roofed, for example, for reflectiveness. On phase 2, I'm interested because that is highly treed right now. Do you have any nesting issues? What kinds of trees are there? If there are certain types of birds that are making their home in those trees, you may or may not be able to do construction during the season that they nest. So these are just some hot things that I'm trying to touch on, so you can understand that taking on a venture like this is so much more than just, okay, Brenna cleared one half, that's great, now we can go build on these pads. It's just for people to think of the out of bounds items that really do affect your cost, excuse me, and your timeline. So you really need to take those things into account, and utilizing local contractors where you can helps with that, because people do then buy into it in the community. It's going to also get you better pricing. Those firms then want to not just build out the space, but they want to be utilized for the maintenance. All of these retail and restaurant chains are required, if they're franchise, and depending on their agreements, they're required to renovate every 5 years, 7 years, depending on whatever their circumstances are. So those contractors won't just be building it and it's a one and done, to Brenna's point before, or Amber's about some developers. Those people can have steady streams of revenue. So that's great for helping to build other companies within the community. So I know that's a lot, but I'm trying to give you a broad range and just one perspective on how you can approach the project. There's several different, and there's good reasons for all of them. Any questions?
That was so interesting when you were talking about the birds and how you might not be able to build in certain seasons, because that's something I've never even considered once. Like, that's kind of incredible. But
my question, project that I worked on, and it put us off about 4 months. So
really,
it can significantly impact your schedule, and you have to, since you asked a question about that, then on the backside you have to file a whole bunch of paperwork and additional survey information and backlog information with the FAA and a few different governmental agencies to make sure you're not displacing certain animals.
So is there a certain point in the process where you are checking for something like that? Like, that it's like a certain bird season or something?
Typically it would come up at some point. Brenda may have some information about that. She may not. Typically there's information out there when you're anywhere around a facility like an airport or something like that, because you have noise restrictions, you have this nesting issue, you have drainage issues, you have a lot of other things that don't just affect this site, but you have to take them into account. For example, to that point, drainage now, you could be draining water off your site, but then you could be flooding out a site next to you. And you don't even know it. So all of these things that have to happen in a situation like this, you may want to issue a contract just to a civil contractor and have you'll have an engineer come in, do all their surveys and things like that. And it doesn't just happen once, it happens over a period of succession and time. And then to the next point with the birds, another oddity is the limestone and stone removal. We worked on a project where you had to condition the soil. So you had to fill the soil inject the soil with water, let it settle, compact, inject it again, let it settle. And that doesn't happen over days, it happens over months. So it's a large impact on your schedule, which makes a site like this much more intricate to the infrastructure around it than you might think.
Right. And I just have one more question. Speaking of roadblocks, with COVID-19, Do you see any restaurants, like I'm thinking about a development site like this with a bunch of restaurants. Do you see people requesting design changes? I don't know if you would touch on that, but like design changes with like they're requesting more drive-throughs or they're wanting like a back entrance for Uber Eats or something like that.
I haven't built any since COVID, any restaurants, so I might defer to Brenna in terms of dealing with trying to get these tenants in the spaces. Because, for example, that space for Chick-fil-A looks pretty large, so that I would imagine would have to accommodate some of those changes. So, Brenna, maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. No, that's a great question, and you're absolutely right, Christine. I mean, basically, anywhere where you can add a patio, restaurants are wanting to add patios. So if we, everything kind of falls within its place in the chain. I mean, the QSRs, which quick service restaurant, meaning typically with drive-through, freestander, they are. I mean, well, heck, some of them are going. I don't know if you guys have heard, but Chipotle is kind of the forerunner, and they call it the Chipotle lanes. So basically, whereas they used to require a drive-through, for their recent builds, now they're actually going away from an order and drive-through. Everything's forced to go through the app, and then you're going to pull up and just go through the lane to pick up your order through the drive-through window. Or you can come onto the property and place your order at a kiosk and then go through the drive-through. So that's what a lot of the QSRs are doing. Burger King just released a new prototype that is like that as well. And we're working with them out in Virginia and Maryland. And so now we're going to have to really reevaluate our site criteria and go back because they have changed. And then your full service restaurants, your high-end restaurants, they want the rooftop bars so that they can be assured of having as much area as possible open air if necessary. And I just going back, Christine, I think you're so right on about the environmental issues. So on this one, this area has some sort of burrowing insect, and I can't even remember what it's called, but so before when you go under contract to buy a property like this, you generally have a free look period of somewhere between 30 and 120 days, depending on what you can negotiate and how complicated the site is. And so, that's called the due diligence period. And N3's philosophy on whatever raw land we buy or building, I guess, for that matter, by the time we get through our free look period, we will know more about the property than the owner does. And so that's something that came up right away. The way we do it is we do our own internal site investigation report with our own staff. Because if we paid somebody to do a site investigation report for every piece of property we looked at, we'd be broke. So we have our own staff look at it first for issues like that. And then if we decide to proceed and start, if we really get serious about the property and we think that it passed the initial site investigation report, we will hire our civil engineer. And the first thing we will have the civil engineer do is their site investigation report. And most of the times, if we've done our job right, it's just a complete duplication of effort, but it's by somebody in the area with the professional license on the line. It's a great double check. And then, we'll just make sure that there aren't any new areas. The other thing about this one that we found out in diligence, and we knew about the area anyway before we got in, all the water is from aquifers and reservoirs. So, you have to have water rights down here. So that was one of the first things that, we had to discuss with the seller before we even went under contract is how many water rights do you have? And let me look at it, because I've got to see if what we're going to use it for, you're going to give me enough rights for.
Thank you for answering that question. Does anyone have any more questions before we go on break?
Yeah, just a quick question for Christine. How long would it like the base work, such as like sewage and like electricity and like the base, like with does that usually take the longest out of the process of like build the buildings? Like is like the base and like all the like the smaller things that are like in the ground and on like inside the walls and stuff like that.
I'm going to say yes because it's the time that nobody thinks to allocate to a project. So it's always longer than they think it should be. So I'm going to say yes. Having said that, it's very individual depending on the site. You have to know if your utilities are going underground. Is there anything existing? You have to work in tandem with the local gas and electric companies and water company. You know, as Brenna said, do you have enough water coming to the site? Just because there's a storm/drainage area, do you have enough water coming to the site, you know, to keep the site moisturized for what's there? And, you know, coming in for all of the buildings you want to do. So I will say yes, because it's the time nobody wants to think about. They want to just cut to the chase and get to the building. But it's you know, it's the building is kind of, the final product is the skin, all that infrastructure below. That's really critical. And if you don't do it right, you're going to regret it.
Yeah, that's a follow-up question too. Like, are there a lot of times where they kind of like over skim it, where they try to do it kind of fast and they end up like messing it up, or like they have to dig under, or like spend more money?
Yes, and that often is the case, and that can be a sticking point too with your contractors, because you're invariably going to have some change orders that come about. You could uncover a pipe and it's 100 years old, yet it wasn't on the survey. So, and that ties into a main drain for the city or the town or whatever municipality. So there's so many X factors when you're doing all your civil work. To name them all would be really impossible, and I'm not a civil engineer, but I can just tell you from my experience, it always adds time to your schedule, because as diligent as you are at planning everything, you know, you have weather, you have all these things that affect that civil aspect of it and all of your site prep. And you may, even if you have pads there, for example, if you have concrete there from a previous building, you may have to tear it all up because it was so long ago that what's under the infrastructure under there doesn't meet code currently. So, and as far as your timeline, there's not really a specific timeline. Again, I would divide phase one probably into 4 different phases, depending on how it was sold out to clients. And you'd have to really manage your schedules tightly in terms of putting those puzzle pieces together.
Awesome. I think that leads us into our break. Y'all stretch, take a sip of water, and come back, and we'll hear from Najdi and Janice, which will tie in all together the brokerage side of a development like this. So definitely come back, and we will see you around in like 5 minutes.
Hi, my busy.
All right. I hope y'all enjoyed that break. I definitely did. I refilled my cup with water and I feel so much better. So now we're going to start off with Janice, who is going to be talking about the brokerage side and going to be talking about commercial investor sales. So,
well, Arden, I'm going to recommend that we have Najee go first because leasing has to happen before we can sell the property. So I think in that process, she should be the first one.
Awesome. Let's do it. I will go to her slide then.
Okay. So I made this slide so that everybody could kind of see the leasing process, and obviously this is very simplified, so there's more involved in this. But I guess if we were on this project, the Escala project, and we were offered the opportunity to lease it out, our first priority would be to discuss the landlord's goals, because I think one of the most important things is to see what their objective is and to be able to define the highest and best use tenant mix. I think a project, in order for it to be successful over the long run, has to have a good tenant mix, something that makes sense for that particular area and environment. And so that would be one of the first things we would do in figuring out what the landlord's objectives are. The next thing would be to basically obtain and analyze the area demographics, finding out, the household income in the area, the ethnicity, age group, traffic count, consumer demand. These days, we have companies that do consumer demand searches for us, which basically allow us to know what people in that area are searching for. Do they usually look up, are they more in favor of having Mexican food or more sushi? Or, we can go to such great lengths of figuring out what is searched for that particular area. So, we would get all of that information, the competitive mapping, where are the competitors and what does the retail landscape look like in that area? So all of that intel is really helpful for a company or a team to be able to basically formulate a leasing plan. So based on that information, we would really just formulate a leasing plan of who we're going to target, what retailers are we going to go to be able to try to connect with them and show them the value in the center. So we would take advantage of all of our relationships that have been built over the years of knowing the different retailers and their requirements, and basically creating marketing materials that showcase the center and all the value that the center brings to the area. I think obviously, your marketing, which is like putting your properties on LoopNet and CoStar and other platforms, are definitely a must. But I think in order for a leasing team to be successful, they have to go far beyond just putting the property on those types of sites. So here is where, those relationships matter. And as you know, the industry of commercial real estate is all about relationships and networking. So that's kind of how you would formulate your plan. And then from there, after, basically doing all that, you hopefully will get to using your negotiation techniques to be able to successfully secure tenants and use those techniques to get in and negotiate your LOIs and leasing and hopefully get to an executed, lease document. Now, the other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on, I think, Brenna had mentioned about some possibilities of maybe doing ground leases, which are becoming very popular over, the last couple of years. And I think one of the things to look at is if that is a goal for the landlord to do a ground lease, we would want to make sure that that ground lease has harmony, or the structure that they're building has harmony with the rest of the commercial project. So that's also some other aspect of leasing that you would have to kind of know about and get into before you actually go out and look for those, tenants, to secure the tenants. And I think, a lot of times companies that do ground leasing do it because sometimes they don't want to have the real estate on their books, and it's more important to them to have that capital, which they would otherwise be putting into purchasing an asset. into their company. So I think, having a ground lease as an objective kind of changes the mix. So that's another thing to kind of look at, be aware of and think about before you actually formulate your leasing plan. So that's kind of a simplified way of how we would go, forward with leasing the project. If anyone has any questions, I think this would be a good time.
Yes, hi. I have a quick question. So after you mentioned you formulate your plan and you have kind of the landlord's objectives in mind, what is a typical lease up time for a retail project like this, would you say?
I'm not too familiar with San Antonio, but I think in most of the projects we work on are in the DFW and some in Austin, but I haven't done too much in San Antonio. I would say 6 to 9 months. Brenna, what do you think?
I agree on the strip centers for sure, and the restaurant and QSR pads. The entertainment users, it might take a year or two to really get one to commit. But yeah, I think 6 to 9 months is really appropriate. I know part of what I've learned on this project too, our brokers down there, they can lease those strip centers all day long, but we're holding them back because we don't want to start with the strips. We wanted to get the anchor first. And so I think that's something, even though Najdi is not leasing this particular project, we've worked together before. And that's one thing I've learned, that, I've got to, as an owner, be upfront, and not that I wouldn't be, but I've got to think about it up front. And before I go hire Najdi and just set her loose, do I really intend to start on that strip center first? Well, probably not, because it's in the middle of the project, and if I build that, then it may prohibit me, from doing something to the left or right of it. It might be better to get that anchor first, and so I think timing is another thing to think about. You might not want to start it up front. But I do agree with the 6 to 9 months for sure.
Okay, great, thanks. I just have a follow-up question. You mentioned that you want to do more kind of higher end dining and limit the kind of the quick drive-through type of restaurant and that kind of retail. Would you have any issues with co-tenancy if maybe like one high-end steakhouse would maybe negotiate in their lease if they wouldn't want any other kind of more formal dining, or how would you kind of negotiate that? Or I think you have about 4 sites that are focused more on kind of sit down eatery. How would you negotiate or kind of plan that out?
Right. Well, all of the tenants are going to want an exclusive for their category. So if we get a steakhouse, they're going to want a provision that says there will be no other steakhouses. But that said, there's 4, casual dine or high-end places in there. So, and there's many categories of those. So, I think we've got enough to offer without people competing with each other.
Okay, thank you.
And Najdi, so if you were to have this development and it's like on the market and everything, but then you get that big anchor like Evo, would the surrounding lease rates would the surrounding lease rates be affected?
Yeah, definitely. Anytime you have a good anchor within your property, that changes everything. So yes, they would definitely increase.
Thank you. And whenever you're trying to fill up tenants for these spaces, how is it different for medical versus retail versus restaurants? Do you have like different strategies to kind of fill up the different spaces?
Yeah, that whole section about analyzing your demographics and the intel that you gathered, prior to formulating your lease plan really changes when, you're going to have a medical / office, center versus a retail center. So all of that has to be taken into consideration before formulating that lease plan. So yes, that changes things a lot.
Thank you.
I actually had a question for Najdi also. How important would you say client referrals are as far as leasing goes? Because I know they're particular about leasing, I guess. Yeah.
Client referrals, meaning like a tenant that referred somebody.
Yeah, like a tenant or like the clients that you're working with to find potential areas and locations.
Oh, I mean, so basically most of our business comes from referrals. So I think it's very important in being able to, find the right space and all that, right space.
Thank you.
And you have a lot of, well, I know because I work for you, but I was going to say you have a lot of clients that are buying retail, or not retail, but restaurants. So what are kind of the biggest roadblocks right now for leasing up restaurants?
So, I mean, it sort of started out being the force majeure provisions in the leases that now are more specific to COVID-19. So those were something that the tenants now are kind of demanding, and the landlords are not so much giving in as much as they, the tenants would want them to do. So that seems like the one thing that we were kind of struggling with when COVID first happened. But other than that, I think generally the environment has other than that provision, and other than the fact that there are a lot of second generation spaces available now for tenants to lease, it's actually brought on, I think, more inventory for us. So it's not a negative impact, but maybe more of a positive for the tenants who are looking to get better deals and have the opportunity to get spaces that are second generation spaces.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about COVID having a positive effect on leasing and everything. That's really, really interesting. And when do you ever see, like, in the market, a situation where there's not enough inventory? Is there like a certain time in the year, or is it like when the economy isn't doing well?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we started getting a lot of clients that were looking for multifamily projects, and I think we're kind of short on that, and like especially the Dallas area. So it really depends. I mean, there's a time where everybody sort of just goes and invests in a certain type of asset because whatever, it's the hype around it, and investors are coming from outside of the state and going in after like these multi-family projects, and then you find yourself really not being able to find things. So it's not so much a matter of time or a part of the year, but it's more of, what's kind of happening with the environment and the economy and all of that.
Cool, thank you. Does anyone have any more questions? If not, we can move on to Janice.
You all have had a lot of listening and a lot of learning to do here. Well, I'd like to pull that down for just a second. I want to, because I'm going to bring that in just a minute. If we could bring that down and bring up the other property again, Arden. So I'm going to talk on twofold, because there's investment sales for large investment packages, and this would, I don't know what Brennan thinks they're performing to sell this property at, but anything above 20 million and above, your pool of buyers gets smaller. I'm going to assume that this would be a good institution. REITs would be buying this property. So as a broker, you're well, first of all, let me step back for just a second and say there's different phases that come along here. If I am an investment broker and I only sell very large retail properties, I have developed a pool of buyers and those folks that own it, and I'm focused on those folks only. It's a much smaller pool of people, but they are much harder to get into. And many times a large transaction will happen between two very large institution owners, and a broker doesn't even get involved. So, but if a broker is involved in this, they're taking it to the large institutions, and the institutions do this every day. They're looking at properties. They've got their criteria of what they're buying. They vet it really quickly. And so you may come down with a pool of maybe 5 buyers. You have prepared a good package for it, and that package is going to be very sophisticated. We'll go to the other package when I start talking about smaller investments. But you'll have everything in there that they could possibly need so that they can just go through it and look through it. And then you might have 1 or more offers on it. The market that we have been in has been high demand for buyers and not so much product, not good product, brand new product with long-term leases. An investor is going to be looking for, you know, really how long will they hold it. They want to look at what their return is, what their investors, they're going to have probably a pool of investors in addition to their own that they will sell shares to. And they want to look at what their return on their investment is and what kind of money they can get, and then when they would sell it. So they pro forma all that pretty much. They go through all the numbers and they figure out just, you know, hey, I'm going to have this tenant here. Maybe the property's 80, 85% leased, and they look at what they think they can lease this up for. They may have some tenants that are rolling, and they're going to say, okay, I can pro forma this. The rent should be going up. Today's market, where we've been looking at increases in rental rates all along. Well, the brakes have been put on now, and especially in retail, you know, we're feeling like the market is the rental rates are going to start dropping because we have so much product and not enough people. So this is when you get caught sometimes when you buy too high and then you're trying to make money in a down market. And so your performance all go to hell in a handbasket in no time at all. So, so you'll have performers, they'll look at it. You know, the larger institutions have their due diligence in check. They have people that go out. You're just basically marketing it, and you'll take the bids. You'll go with the best buyer. But one of the biggest things you're going to look at is the capability of buying. We recently bought an office building, and we were competing against large institutional owners. Well, they were the safe bet. We came in and we visited with the owners and we talked about what we had. We had a large owner occupant that was going to take it and was going to finance the whole deal. And through that discussion, we were able to get the property. But for the most part, they're looking at the ability for the buyer to close. Because if they take it off the market, let's say that they do their due diligence and they decide they don't want to buy it, well, they've lost some marketing time. So that's really important to know that whoever you're selling the property to can perform at the end of the day. So I want to talk about the process for an investment sale, and I really want to talk about smaller investments because number one, I don't sell large retail. Retail's not my world. My world is office and light industrial. And most of what I do as a broker is I work with investment sales under 20 million. So now we can put up my flyer. So the first thing, when you're an investment broker, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go be hunting for listings. And on these particular listings, let's flip back to this. I had an owner that had these 2 properties. He actually has quite a few other properties in the area, but I met with him early on, maybe probably 2 years ago, and asked him what he wanted to do with his real estate. And he said, I know someday I think I'm going to want to sell my older properties. So really, I courted this gentleman. He was actually one of our clients through the property management company that we bought. And so I had been working with him for some time. And so last year he decided to put them on the market. We got them ready to go on the market, put them on the market in the fall of the year. We put them on a package together and we took it to the marketplace. Well, it was a $14 million deal. So, you know, our pool of buyers wasn't as much. And of course, they wanted to negotiate. So then the buyer decided that he wanted to parcel them out. So in that process, the first thing is to get the listing. And then the second thing that you do is you build a package. And in this situation, and you can start rolling through that, Arden, just to, it's, you're going to talk about the property, the location, the benefits of it, the financial analysis of it. And in this particular situation, we're talking about cap rates. And cap rates are no more than just a feel for the market. If I'm going to buy a property this age, what kind of capitalization rate should I pay for this? And that is your net operating income divided by the purchase price comes up with a percentage. Today's marketplace, buildings like this are selling in, if they're well located, in the 6% cap up to not so well located up to the 8% cap. So buyers are looking at that. They're trying to figure out the numbers there. And then they're also looking, this one has a lot of medical. Medical's been a real darling because medical will stay, the doctors stay in spaces much longer, and they typically will pay more because their finish out is higher. So over the long term, you get more money from them. So once you have taken it to market, and we use CoStar, LoopNet, Crexi, most investments are not, you don't see a sign up for a investment property because they don't want the tenants to know that you're trying to sell their property. So it's mostly on the databases, a lot of phone calls. You'll be qualifying people a lot, and then you're probably going to start seeing some offers after they've looked at the property, they've looked at the numbers. It looks like something that they're interested in buying. In one case, we had this property right here that we're looking at, right, London Square, 10 little office buildings, a good mix of medical and then services. We had 6 interested parties that had all given us offers on the property. So we did a best and final, and that was a form letter that was based on my client's requirements to go under contract. And then we took the highest offer. And we had 2 offers that were at full price, and one that kept saying they really wanted it. So, I said, well, if you really want it, then you need to pay over asking price, which they gave us an offer for over asking price. That particular group was a developer. They couldn't do what they wanted to do, so they fell out. So we went to the second buyer, and the second buyer would have closed if COVID hadn't hit, and they were heavy into retail, so that affected this purchase, and they fell out. And so in July, we closed on this property with a group that had sold a property and had 1031 exchange, and so they bought it, closed on it in 45 days. So that's a process that you would go through. As a broker, especially as an investment broker, everything that everybody's talked about before, from ground lease to the airspace, all of those things are things that the brokers have to know, because you're the one at the end of the day that's putting everything together to sell it. Brenna makes most of her money when she sells this property, and that's what the end goal is to move this property and optimize that sale, and then she would go take that 1031 into another development, another piece of land, another already built property. So the investment side of it is what is the end game for everything. All the work that Naji does, she's looking for good qualified tenants with strong credit. She's looking for longer term leases. They may put in more finish out dollars because when they sell the property, they'll get more money for it. And you always look at it from the end game. You're always looking at, if I do this lease, if I sell this on a 6 or a 7 cap, what do I make off of this space? So the investment side of the world is kind of a know everything. You have to understand about roofs, because roof is always the most important thing. Look, this building has a lot of rooftop. You have to deal with the insurance, because this particular roofer, or this particular buyer, was trying to get a new roof, and so they were trying to scheme how to get the how to get the insurance company to pay for a new roof. There's all sorts of things happen in the process of selling a property. So once you have your offers and you're in your due diligence, you're working with the folks to get this, these properties, to answer all their questions and get them satisfied. So once you get done with all that inspection, the due diligence period, the money goes firm. That's when the earnest money that's been put up will go to the seller. So the buyer, if the buyer puts up $100,000, they don't want to lose it. So they're going to try to close the property. But I have had situations where we've gone all the way to closing, and for whatever reason, I mean, in this situation, it could be like a COVID. COVID changed everything for them. They would walk away from money and leave it on the table because they just can't close on the sale. Yeah, you have to work with the lenders. The lenders are a big part of it, and sometimes if they can't get qualified by a particular lender, the broker has to help them. Even not their representative, but the listing broker will send them out folks that they can talk to as well. In today's market, the lenders are pretty skittish. They're slow about moving. They're extremely conservative, and so the sale that we're working on for the other property. I mean, we've actually had to recommend some other investor or some other lenders for them to look at as well. Who wants to be a broker? Can I see a show of hands of people that want to be brokers? Yeah, it's, that's usually when we sit down with people, that's what they really want to do. And I think Naji would agree with me. She came out of corporate. It's a very fulfilling business. I've been doing this for many, many years. And the thing that I love the most about it is you can do so many different things and learn so many. Like, I don't know how to develop, and I don't have any desire to develop, but you can lease, you can sell, you can do all sorts of things with the brokerage world. And there's so many people that start there. Naji wants to be a broker too.
I was going to mention, I forgot to say this, but I think one of the most exciting things about being a broker is that you learn something new every day, and there's never two transactions that are ever the same, and you can attest to that. And I think for me, that is the most exciting thing, because I have a job that I learn a new aspect of it every single time I finish a transaction. So that's for sure true.
Every one of these women that spoke to you all are risk takers. None of us have a steady paycheck.
That is right.
We probably all pay for our own health care. It's just how it is. But this is the most fulfilling industry that I can imagine being in. And there's so many brokers that I know that have been doing this. They should be retiring, but they love doing it so much that they keep doing it. So if you want to be a broker, we're cheering you on.
Absolutely.
Or a lender.
Or a lender. There you go. I was trashing those lenders. Sorry.
No, well, you're right. I mean, everything you said is absolutely true. So we've been definitely more conservative lately in portfolio management mode. With COVID, I mean, it's changed everything.
Yeah, I will jump in. One of the things, that I did not hit on the agenda when I first started was, it asked about career advice. So since we're on the broker topic, I will give you guys some career advice. If you want to be a broker coming out of school, make sure that you don't overcommit your finances, because when you're a broker, you are building a book of business for somewhere between 1 and 2, 3 years, depending on what's going on in the economy. And, like Janice said, you need to pay your own health care. You're not going to get a big salary like you would, going to be a financial analyst or somewhere. And so if you're so excited about getting out of school that you're buying a new car or buying a house, or I mean even, getting married, or whatever it is, that people want to do as soon as they see the school bills stop and the paychecks start. I'm all for it. I mean, I went the corporate route, but if you want to be a broker, take your time, live cheaply, live with others. Do not go buy a bunch of new stuff, and really take your time to build your book of business without having the monthly bills. Because especially if you're a woman, I've talked to so many women who would have loved to have been brokers, but they just couldn't afford to not have a paycheck because they already had kids, or whatever it was. And so if you want to be a broker, I mean, I wish I had done it. I encourage you to do it, but live frugally so that you can do it, and then come out the other side with the book of business, and then you'll make more money than the rest of us.
This is kind of a question for both Janice and Najdi, but when did you know in your career that it was time to start your own brokerage?
You want to go first, Janice?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to go first, Najdi?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So, I'm not as big a risk taker as you would think because of what I do, but I have a business partner who's a huge big risk taker, and she's just a big thinker. So I had been at Henry S. Miller for 15 years, and that's where I met her. And we, it was always the same thing, but we both had kids. We could pretty much do what we wanted to do because we were both producers. So I didn't want to rock the boat, but she kept saying, we need to go do this and start our own business. We need to do this. We'd make more money. So we were approached by a company that wanted to start a brokerage firm in the Dallas area. They were national, and they did boutique real estate. So we went with them, and with the whole purpose of, when we grew the business, that we would be partners. And when that happened, and we were expanding the office space, and we had a good group of brokers, and we said, okay, now it's time for us to have have the returns that we're putting in. That was probably 3 years after we left, and they didn't want to do it. So we said, okay, we're going to buy you out. And so we bought them out, started Hudson Peters in 2008, which, 2008, for those of us in the business know that the market crashed in 2008, and we had our longest down market. But we had an established group of clients, and we work with our clients. Our clients have needs when the market's good and they're trying to buy and they're spending money, or when they're downsizing. So we still were able to sustain, and and then we bought a property management company in 2016. We bought our own office building in 2016, and then last year we bought, with one of our clients, Bentry Tower 2. So we're moving now into the capital markets. We're looking for things to buy, and our clients have invested with us. So it's been a growth process. Najdi, your turn.
So for me, it was a little bit different. As I mentioned, I was in the corporate world. So I was the VP of acquisitions and dispositions for GE Capital Real Estate in Los Angeles. And in 2012, they decided to get rid of all their real estate holdings. So I was one of the last people to be basically laid off because there was no more GE Capital Real Estate. So at that same time, I was moving to Dallas, and so I started doing consulting work, because part of what we did at GE was all the due diligence that's involved in acquiring assets or even disposing of assets. So I started doing some consulting work for some of the former GE colleagues who had moved on to other companies and also started their own companies. And then I started doing consulting work for local firms such as N3 Real Estate, which was a great company to work with. And Archon.
You did a great job.
Thanks. So I started doing that consulting work in 2012, and then all of a sudden I decided, I could kind of incorporate what I do with the consulting and start the brokerage side of things, and kind of, see where that takes me. And so in 2014 is when kind of Link became Link, Commercial Realty. And I had my commercial real estate license, like the brokerage license in California, and I still do. So it wasn't that difficult for me to, get the Texas license. It was fairly quick. And so I started Link, and that's kind of how it came about. But I've had my actual sales license since I was 19, because when I was my first year of college, I worked at a real estate firm, and I did marketing and administrative work for some of the high-end, high producers of that firm. And then they offered to basically pay for my licensing. So since I was 19, I was always in some way, shape, or form involved with commercial real estate. So that's how it all came about.
That's a great story.
Yeah. Wow. Y'all are so inspiring, and thank you so much for being on this panel. Does anyone have any other questions?
I have a question. I'm curious, and this is for all of you. How do you see COVID, or do you see COVID changing the future in terms of office rental space? What do you see that look like for the next, 5-10 years, or 5 years or so, I guess?
Do you want me? Oh.
Go ahead, Brett.
Go ahead, Najdi.
Okay, so we've been doing a lot of actually research on this, because we do a lot of office and medical leasing as well. It seems to me that companies are now going away from having one big corporate office and looking at seeing where their personnel is, and having suburban outposts is what they're calling it. And I feel like instead of seeing everybody huddled into one area in one building, they're going to have satellite offices all over the place. And so I think the whole environment of working in an office, and possibly even working all the time in an office, is definitely changing. And I think these suburban outposts will be coming up in the near future.
And I would just say that, since I've been doing this for so long, I've seen companies, everybody jumps on the bandwagon, right? Send everybody home, and everybody's going to work out of home. And then pretty soon they're saying, well, we're losing our culture, and then they bring everybody back. I mean, the hoteling, we do office space, and they'd have little hotel booths in it, and they were never used. So my opinion is, yes, there's going to be change. Anything like this will always make change. We don't know exactly what that's going to do, but I would tell you, sure enough, when we change for COVID, when COVID is gone, they have a vaccine, and, hopefully we won't have another virus, or we will have learned enough from this one that this will be forgotten, and then we'll be doing something different. I know some people work great at home. They're much more productive. But as employers, you lose really controlling, and it's hard to build a culture. And that's why we work. We work, part of the reason, because we enjoy being around other employees. But I definitely think that the market will be changing. We have so much sublease on the market, and a lot of that sublease that's coming onto the market are bigger corporations, just as Najee said, are saying, we don't need all this space. We can do something different here.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering that question, because that's a question on everyone's mind right now. Everyone's like, what's going on with office, retail? That's what a lot of people were talking about at the crew convention as well. So it's good to hear different perspectives and everything. But yeah, if anyone doesn't have any other questions, we're going to go on to our student raffle. Does anyone, last call for questions?
Oh, look at the graphic.
Thank you. Gabby, do you want to take the screen?
Yes, yeah, I'm doing that right now. Give me 1 second. Okay. Great. So we'll go ahead and get started with our student raffle, as Arden mentioned. So if you RSVP'd on our website, your name got put into the raffle. So we'll go ahead and pick our first water bottle winner. And I do want to just mention super quick, thanks again for everyone that was able to join in. I know that this week is kind of busy with exams for a lot of our students. I know I had personally had one this morning, and I know a couple of people had some for Guttery's class. So thanks again for everyone who was able to stick on. But our first winner is Senna. So congratulations for winning our water bottle. We'll be getting in touch with you with the shipping information, but you should be getting that later on this week. We're going to do 5 raffle winners tonight, so we'll go ahead and pick the second one as well. Okay, great, awesome. And so it seems like Clayton is our second winner of tonight. I'm just making a quick note. Okay. Okay, and I think I saw you before. Please, can you speak up into your name? I don't want to mispronounce your name if you're still on the call. Okay, might have left early, but I want to say it's Kinyashu. So congratulations for being our third winner. We have 2 more water bottles that we'll be giving out to some of our students that joined our call today or tonight.
This is so cool how you can do it live.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually a really cool app. It's, I think, only available on Windows. I tried getting it on my Mac earlier, but yeah, like you just input the names early before and just a text file, and it just kind of picks it. Yeah. So Dylan's our 4th winner, and I think we have 1 more water bottle. So our last winner of the night is, let's see. Awesome. So congratulations to everyone that won water bottles tonight. Like I mentioned, we'll be getting that out to you guys to be sent later on this week. I'll pass it back to Arden. I know we're doing a couple, we have some time set aside for more loosely structured networking. So I'll just pass it back on. Or actually, sorry, before we do that, we do have our evaluation workshop for our students with guest speaker James Ray from MetLife. He's the director of acquisitions and development there. And so we'll be having our next event, October 1st. He'll be joining us and kind of walking us through the steps to value multifamily property. So you guys don't want to miss that. And you can go ahead and RSVP on our website as well. But we'll go ahead and I'll pass it back to Arden to kind of wrap up the event, and we can get on to the next item on the agenda.
Yeah, so the next item is just any other general questions that you may have for the panel, and maybe just networking or whatever you have to say to the panel.
I did have one more question for Brenna. I know you're still kind of in early development of the Scala project, but what's kind of the end goal? I know that are you thinking for holding it for until it's leased up and then selling it, or are you guys wanting to keep it in your portfolio? What's kind of the your plan or your strategy for this development?
Yep. We will probably hold it for cash flow. One thing I didn't mention earlier is Evo is actually purchasing their piece. And because they're the anchor, we're going to let them do that, versus where with the other pads we'll hold off and just lease those or ground lease them out. And so for the rest of it, we will hold it for long term, just because that's what our, investors' mandate is to continue to earn cash flow from real estate assets, and they don't really want the capital back. They just want to have that continual income stream. I would say for most developers, they would probably just build and sell because they're in it for the quick, profit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And this just came to my mind, Janice, you mentioned like whenever you're looking to sell it to investors or like a property to investors, it has to have a certain percentage of space leased. What kind of roughly is that percentage?
Well, everything's different. I mean, some buyers are going to look for, even if it's a property that is what we call a value add property, it may have low occupancy. It may need refurb. It may be well located, but it is just an old building. So in that case, you could look at it and go, wow, if your owner wants to get X for it and it's a reasonable price and it's lower than you think you could sell that property with somebody to get the upside, they would get a value on it. They would pay less for it. But 80 to 85% is a pretty good occupancy for a building to go out to market, because there's enough running room that somebody could lease it up and they could still have cash flow coming in. So yeah, every deal's different, but that's at least it's kind of the line. The buildings I sold are 100% leased, and that particular owner wanted to get them to 100% lease and take them out. Their value add as well, because he's always been below market because he's owned them for so long. So the next buyer, that's what I sold on, is that the market, the market was still going up. They could increase the rents. They could actually just charge for electricity and add, another $1.60 a square foot to the NOI.
Thank you. That's good to know.
I did just have one more question that I forgot to touch on, but Najee, what would the typical rent structure be for some of the retail leases? Are they on gross percentage, or are they on triple net?
Yeah, so most of the leases we're working on, the retail leases, are triple net leases. And the way that they're structured, there's usually like a base rent that starts off at a particular, price point. And then they have escalations of usually 3% annually. And then you have to always add the triple net to that, which is what the tenant ends up paying for the year. And then once you divide that by 12, that would be what their monthly base rent and triple net would be.
Okay. And sorry, just kind of get more clarification. I have always thought that restaurant leases had more of a percentage of sales rather than triple net. Is that kind of something that was typical in the market, and now it's moving to triple net, like in office?
Well, no, I've seen that before too. Right now, we're actually representing a bunch of franchisees, and for some reason, the structure that we have going at this point in time is usually just the base rent with the triple net. They don't actually ask. They're not asking for a gross percentage of the sales of the restaurants. But you are right. I mean, that is common also. But I haven't done one of those in I don't know how long.
I have, and I will tell you this, that's one thing that the tenant typically likes to keep. The sales have to be, much higher, because it is hard. They keep coming into your pocket for everything, the rents, the triple nets, and in retail as well, they build everything out themselves. So if they keep that margin, that number high enough, it's usually not a problem. But those high producing restaurants, most of the time, if the location's really, really strong, probably in Uptown more than other areas, they're going to be able to get the percentage rents.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, we're kind of perfectly wrapping this up right now around the time that we planned for. Thank you so much to the panel for coming out and taking the time out of your week to talk to our members. I know a lot of them are going to be joining on the recording, so we really do appreciate it, and we look forward to maybe future events in like the coming semesters.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thanks again, you guys. Great evening.